Hello, I'm Greg Nichols, Science and Technology Advisor for the Homeland Defense and Security Information Analysis Center. And today we're going to talk about some emerging threats we have with new classes of bioweapons. Traditionally, biological weapons have been things like viruses and bacteria that have existed on this planet for thousands of years, but scientists have just been able to find ways to weaponize them. One of the most commonly used ones is anthrax, which is a bacteria that usually affects livestock. Another one that we often see or have been worried about would be smallpox, which is a virus that causes some devastating effects. Smallpox has been eradicated since the 1970s worldwide, but it still is a concern because there are some specimens that remain. However, we have seen a new class of bioweapons emerge, mainly due to some technological advances recently. There are three different classes that we can kind of look at to see how bioweapons could potentially be altered from these more traditional things that we have in mind. So one of the ways to do this is through synthetic biology. We actually have the technology now that we can create organisms that have never existed before. And just recently, to show that this is possible, some researchers in the United Kingdom were actually able to create the world's first artificial virus. It was about 12 nanometers wide, and it was a capsid, which is the outer covering of a virus. Another thing that researchers have been able to do is to edit the genes, the genetic material of existing organisms to make them more virulent, or to make them do different things and express their characteristics in different ways. The main technique that we use with this is called CRISPR. CRISPR is also a technology that's being used to treat other types of diseases such as cancer. So it's one of those things that has both a very beneficial use but also a very detrimental use at the same time. And the third possibility that we see with creating new bioweapons is through nanobiotechnology. Now this is a technique where you actually combine two things, nanotechnology, which is engineering on the nanoscale, so dealing with things that are between 1 and 100 nanometers, so very, very tiny things, in combination with biotechnology, which is basically the engineering of biological systems. And so when you combine these two things, you can actually create a whole host of new processes, biological processes, potentially some new traits in different types of organisms. And researchers have done this with viruses, bacteria, things like that. The problem with some of these new emerging bioweapons is that if we're creating new organisms that haven't existed before, we don't have any defenses against them. There aren't any antibiotics that can stop these new types of infections or new vaccines. So the best way that we can actually prevent some of these things is just through awareness, through talks like this, through presentations, through responsible development, and then in some form or fashion, eventually we'll have to start thinking about, can we develop medications, vaccines, things like that, that could prevent the spread of some of these new emerging threats. So thanks for joining today. I want to remind you that you can find more information on emerging bioweapons on our website, HDIAC.org, and you can always follow us on Twitter.